This is our third video on our series in Fragments. In our first two videos, we looked at how we can take an existing application that does not use fragments and convert it to use fragments. So the user still gets the same look and feel of going from a search page to a results page, but we're using fragments. And the benefit of fragments is we're disconnecting the layout from the management of the layout. That will allow us to have an application that looks good and looks native on a mobile phone and looks good and looks native on a tablet as well, and several other resolutions that we might have. So what we did is we used a list fragment here to replace a list activity. What we want to do now is we want to have it so that we can click on one of these and go to a web view fragment. Now, web view fragment is something that a web view in general is something that I would generally recommend for several reasons. Number one, we as mobile developers oftentimes have to make the same application for multiple platforms, and that requires a lot of work. So Android, iOS, web requires a lot of work. If we can use the mobile phone for what it does well, and that is GPS and a camera and maybe contacts or whatever information we get from the mobile phone, and then we use that to redirect the user to a common set of data like a web page, then that common data is something we don't have to rewrite for all of the different platforms that we're going to support. We write it once, we write it well, we write it for a format that's friendly for mobile, and we don't have to rewrite it several times. Another thing that's a bit interesting, and this isn't official or anything, but in a web view, if you have a web view and you have advertisements that appear, those ads will count as web clicks, which, there's no official rule about this, but generally advertisements on the web pay more than advertisements that you'll find in mobile. So in the live production Plant Places mobile app, I do a search on the mobile phone. I do a search by color that uses the camera on the mobile phone and the image gallery. It also sends up GPS information so we can be more selective about plants that might be better for a certain location over another, depending on the climate. But once that search is finished, it goes out to the plantplaces.com website and shares the details from there. So that's our ultimate goal in this video. Now, we remember that the fragment is closely associated with a layout, where the activity is associated with managing which layout to show, or in other words, which fragment to show. So fragments add a level of indirection over the old way of just having activities and layouts. So one tricky thing that we need to do here is when I hit search, we remember on a mobile phone, it's going to come to this list, but on a tablet, it's going to look a little bit different. We're going to keep the list over to the left side. Let's see if I can do a search here on this one. We're going to keep the list over towards the left. We want to use this real estate on the right for our web view. So we're going to have a bit of a different look and feel because you see as it is now, the list is only taking up the left side of the view anyway, and we have all this real estate over to the right that we can allocate for a web view. So we have to develop the web view as a fragment. But on a similar note, the list fragment should not process the click here when I select something. Instead, that needs to go to the actual activity that is managing this fragment. The activity that's managing this fragment is called the Plant Results Manager, and the fragment itself is called the Plant Results Fragment. If this doesn't make sense, I recommend you go back to the first and second video in the series, which is where I actually made those fragments. Okay, fragments are a little bit tricky, to be honest with you, because they get into some pretty deep programming terms, some pretty deep concepts like callbacks. In this case, we dealt with threading, which isn't directly associated with the fragment, but first, the fragment is going to know when something is clicked on our list. It is going to be the first point of contact. We just don't want it to do a whole lot of work. We want it to hand off to the activity as soon as we can. So I'm going to say and by the way, I'm in the plant results fragment right now. That's what's actually showing this view that we see here. So I'm going to say on list item. I'm going to start typing. This is the method that's going to get called when we click something in that list. Now, because of Eclipse's shortcuts, what I can do is I can simply start typing this method and then hold Control and hit space. Eclipse will say, hey, you know what? I bet you want to override the method on list item click. And indeed I do. So on list item click, okay, let me do a little bit of housekeeping here. What we really care about is this thing called position, because that tells us which item was clicked. So what I can do is I can say l.get item at position. It's a little tricky here, l.get item at position, and then we pass in the position. It's a little tricky here because this is going to return a superclass object. That's a capital O, the highest level superclass of all objects. And what we're actually storing in there is a plant. So we're going to need to do a little bit of casting, because if you see from our last lecture, what we did is we took this array of plants and we're storing that in our list activity here, in our list fragment here. So l.get item at position, what I can do is I can assign this to a variable. I hold Control and I press 1, and that will allow me to assign to a new local variable. Okay, but you see it returns it as a capital O type. That's very high level, that's not a plant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say plant. We're going to name the variable plant with a lowercase p. I'm going to hit tab, and we're going to make the variable type plant as well. As soon as I do this, I get a message that says type mismatch. That typically indicates we're going from a very high level type to a subclass. So we're going from a superclass to a subclass. We have to acknowledge we're doing that by adding a cast. Every time I've gone over casting at the university, it's confusing. And so don't overthink it. Honestly, let's just go ahead and use their suggestion here and cast it ourselves. Now, that was a lot of talking, so let me put a comment. We are getting the plant that the user selected from the list and storing it in the variable named plant. Okay, now that's good. I'll go ahead and disconnect from the debugger. I'm going to snap a breakpoint there. We'll debug through this in just a moment. But here's the tricky part. We are in the fragment. We have to have some way of telling the activity that's managing us that this plant was clicked. And we have to tell it which plant was clicked, because this is the important part. If I say plant.getGUID, okay, that's a global unique identifier. Let me Control 1. Let me assign to new local variable. GUID is fine. I'll put some comments to this effect. I'll say get the global unique identifier for this plant and save. Now, why is that important? Why do I need the global unique identifier? Well, as it works out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to redirect the user to the plantplaces.com website in a web view. And I'll bring that up over here. And what we'll see is that the global unique identifier is the plantplaces.com identifier, which is all you need. If I search for redbud, for instance, that's all you need to form a URL that's going to take you directly to this plant. So you see this redbud is number 83. That's the global unique identifier for this redbud. And if I scroll down, we're going to see some pictures of this redbud. Okay, I like that picture quite a bit there. Now, a different redbud, let's say the forest pansy redbud, has a global unique identifier of 119. So a different redbud with different pictures has a different global unique identifier. If I change that to 83, that's going to pull up our very first redbud, which has that global unique identifier of 83. So you see the GUID, the global unique identifier, is all I really need in addition to the URL that I've highlighted here to find a plant. So I'm going to copy that URL because I know I'm going to need that later, and off screen here I'm pasting it into a notepad so that I can access it later. Okay, so the GUID is something important. We have to have a way to tell the managing activity that a plant was selected, and this is the global unique identifier for that plant. To do that, we have to do a callback. A callback is where this class or maybe some other class defines an interface, and that interface has a method. The method's the important part. We have to tell our managing activity to implement this interface. Once the managing activity implements this interface, then what we can do in this onListItemClick is we can tell the activity that this plant was selected. So let's make an interface. And again, let's not overcomplicate things. An interface can be an inner class. So I can say, we can put it anywhere. I could put it at the top. I can say interface, callback. And then what I can do is open curly and close curly. And I can just define the method right here. I can say public void plant selected, and maybe we'll pass it that global unique identifier, something like this. Okay, now that's an interface. An interface is just a type that can serve as a variable type. That's important. An interface type can serve as a variable type. And we're saying that if we have a variable of this type, it has to implement this method I've defined here called plant selected. So we'll say a callback interface that will allow this fragment to communicate with its managing activity. Okay? Okay. This method will be invoked when the user selects a plant. Okay. Okay, good. The plantplaces.com global unique identifier, which is used to render the correct, I'll put that on one line, web page for this plant. Okay, that'll work. Okay, and save. Now, remember I said that a callback can be a variable type. So watch this. Callback parent from, let's say, managing activity, and terminate with a semicolon. And take a look at that. You see this? Callback managing activity. So the variable named managing activity is a variable of type callback, where I've defined callback here and I have given it a method here. Again, if you're new to programming, I know that's a bit of a tricky concept. But interfaces are very important in Java because they allow us to do this kind of relationship between a class we might not know much about. Okay, now let's take that, and in the onListItemClick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if, and what I call that variable, I called it managing activity. If managing activity does not equal null, now watch this. Managing activity dot, okay, now what's that method we defined? Plant selected, and we pass in that global unique identifier. Okay, so I'll put a comment that says inform our managing activity that this plant has been selected, and save. Okay, so a couple more things that we are going to want to do. When our activity attaches to us, it's going to invoke a method called onAttach, and that's where we can assign a variable, assign an object to this variable, because you see right now this variable has been declared but not assigned. Therefore, it will always be null. Okay. Now I'm still in this class called plant_results_fragment. What I'm going to do is I am going to override a method called onAttach. We know Eclipse has an easy way to override a method. We simply say onAttach, like we start to type it, control space, onAttach, and that is overriding our method. And you see what it's doing here is it's passing in an activity. So this method is invoked when a managing activity attaches, for lack of a better word, to this fragment. Okay, what we can do now is we can say if, actually I'll tell you what we're going to do. We are going to say, we're going to use another Eclipse shortcut. We have to make sure that this activity actually implements the callback that we defined up above, this thing called callback. So what we're going to do is an Eclipse shortcut. This is one of those times where if this syntax does not make sense to you because you haven't seen it before, just use the shortcut I'm about to show you. I want to keep this video concise. I don't want to go too deep into Java syntax, but there are certainly other videos that will tell you about this. So I'm going to say instance of all one word, all lowercase. That's important. Control space and enter. If activity, instance of type. Okay, the type is what we need to fill out, and that's callback. Okay? Then we're going to say callback. We'll say managing activity, or wait, shoot, is that, oh no, can't use that again. Callback, we'll just say callback with a lower c. Callback with a lower c equals blah. Okay, again, if that syntax doesn't make sense and you just want to use fragments, just rewind 15 seconds, watch it again. Trust me on this one, just use the syntax that I've shown you here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say we know that the managing activity implements our callback interface. So assign it. Callback, yeah, I'm sorry, wrong way. Managing activity, whoops, misspelled that. Managing activity equals callback. Okay? Believe it or not, that's all there is to it. And again, I know I didn't give a super huge explanation of that, so I'm going to put a quick comment here that says, okay, see if our managing activity implements callback. If so, cast it. You know, if you know what that means, great. If not, don't worry about it. Now, when the managing activity detaches from our fragment, it's going to call a method called onDetach. So I'm going to use the little Eclipse shortcut to override that. And then I'm simply going to set the callback to null so that it won't be invoked again. This is a bit dirty because that means every time we call a method on this callback, we're going to have to check for null, which is kind of dirty. So that can be left to be refactored and save. At this point, I'm in pretty good shape. At this point, all I need to do is go back to the managing activity, have it implement this callback method, and then we're going to watch what happens when we click on a list item. We're going to make sure that everything gets called properly, and that's going to put us in really good shape for our web view. So I Control M, I go to the managing activity, Plant Results Manager, Control M again, and what I need to do to associate this activity with that callback is simply say implements, and then we're going to say plant results fragment dot callback. There we go. Okay, now watch what happens. You see, as soon as I do that, we get a red line here. And what does the red line say? The type plant results manager must implement the inherited abstract method, blah, 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 blah. It's long text, but just click on this and see what happens. Do you remember this method? Plant selected int GUID. So what I'm going to do here, do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to say, I'm just going to put in a dummy line so that we can debug here. I'm going to say int foo equals 1 plus 1. And I'm going to add a comment that says, this is where we will open a web view to the plant with the specified GUID. So we just want to be able to step into here as we debug. So I snap a breakpoint. It's kind of hard to see, but okay, looks like we have a breakpoint there. I'm going to save, make sure everything's saved. I'm going to Control M, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to say debug as, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this up in my phone. So we'll give it a moment for the little AVD selector to come up because I have both a phone and a tablet. So we'll give it a moment for that AVD selector. Okay, I choose the phone. I will go ahead and bring the phone into view. One moment, please. Okay, there we go. And let's see how far we can get with this. Okay, so far so good. So I type in Redbud. Okay, and I hit search. Shouldn't expect anything drastic here, but now when I click on Cercis canadensis Eastern Redbud, this is where I'm expecting the debugger to pick up. Okay, so I click, sure enough the debugger picks up. Notice we're in the method called onListItem click. We have a position, probably 0. I'm going to F6 or choose the step over. I'm going to mouse over plant and notice Cercis canadensis, Eastern Redbud, GUID 83. Remember that, Cercis canadensis, Eastern Redbud, and sure enough, that is the one I selected. Okay, step over, and now we're going to say is managing activity not null, and we do see that it has been assigned to something, so we say managing activity dot plant selected. Now here's what gets interesting. I can either step into, or I can just tell this to play because I have a breakpoint set on the other side. I'm going to go ahead and tell this to play, but take a look at what happens when I play. If you didn't see that, rewind a few seconds, and what you'll notice is the Plant Fragment tab has basically gone away, and the Plant Result Manager, okay, the managing activity has picked up. And take a look at what we have here. It's passed in GUID 83. Again, the Plant Results Fragment, okay, that's this tab right here. That's the fragment that owns this list. What that has done is that has passed this magic number 83, the unique identifier for our favorite redbud over here. It's taken that and it's passed it up to the Plant Results Manager. At this point, what do we do? At this point, the Plant Results Manager has the information that it needs to render a web view that's going to show a mobile-friendly version of this page right here. Now, this video is getting right around the 22-minute mark, which is where I like to cut things off to keep things nice and concise. So let me go ahead and upload this video, and the next video will be part 4, which is where we're going to make that web view, and we are going to have it open to the plant detail page for our Cercis canadensis. I look forward to seeing you then.